Welcome to the seminar. So unfortunately, COVID invited itself again to the seminar series, which is why we're doing it remotely today. But I'm very excited to introduce our speaker, Monica Baum. Monica is from the East Coast of the US. She did her degree in biology in Duke University, and that traveled all the way to the West Coast, to Oregon State for her master's. And then she traveled again east, but this time she didn't stop in the East Coast. She went all the way to Europe to do her PhD in Switzerland, and she's now visiting us thanks to a Swiss foundation, a research foundation grant for a year at EBD. In the discussion, she'll be joined by Derek Lee, who's a professor at Penn State, and together the two of them have been working on giraffe populations in Tanzania for over a decade. And this is what we'll be hearing about today. So Monica, thank you. The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you so much, Letitia, and thank you everybody for joining me and Derek today to do a deep dive into the world of giraffes. So today I'll be sharing with you some giraffe tall tales, fitness consequences of environmental and individual variation in a wild mega herbivore. And this is a joint project between the University of Zurich, the Penn State University, and Wild Nature Institute. And we're really excited now to be collaborating with folks at the EBD. And as Letitia mentioned, my project partner, Derek Lee, is also here and will be helping to answer questions that you might have after the presentation. So both Derek and I got our earliest training in wildlife biology with several long-term, multi-decade research programs where individual animals were identified at birth and repeatedly observed throughout their lives. And these long-term individual-based animal studies are rare, but they're incredibly important to understanding population biology. So today I'm going to summarize some of the results from our first decade of our individual-based study of giraffes in Tanzania. Our study was designed to learn more just about basic giraffe life history, especially in a human-dominated landscape, and to test what we think we know about population biology of ungulates that have been learned in the temperate latitudes with a tropical species. Demography is the study of births, deaths, and movements. And long-term demography studies based on identification and monitoring of individuals over time are ideal for examining population biology and evolutionary ecology in natural and complex ecosystems. So population biology at the very basic level begins with repeatedly counting how many animals you can detect in an area to estimate population size. This graph of repeated counts shows sea lion population size each year from 1970 to 2008 on the Farallon Islands in California. And so you can see this line has several interesting trends up and down, and simply counting will give us this pattern. But then the next question is, what process is causing the population to increase or decrease? Is it improved survival of adult females, or higher reproductive rates, or immigration from outside of the study area? And then beyond that, what are the drivers of these changing demographic rates? So knowing the births, deaths, and movements of individuals can tell you the answers. And because survival and reproduction are direct indicators of fitness, individual-based demographic studies of wild animals are also important for studying life history evolution under real conditions. So individuals have quantifiable characteristics such as age, size, body condition, even spot patterns on their fur, disease state, their personalities. And these can all be influenced by environmental conditions that vary in space and time, and which may or may not affect fitness. And if that quantifiable characteristic is heritable, it can be considered a trait, and fitness variation in those traits is the raw material for evolution. So now a little bit about giraffes. Giraffes are very large, the tallest land mammals, and they grow up to 5 meters tall, and they can live up to 40 years. They're an iconic indicator of acacia savanna woodland ecosystems in Africa, but surprisingly little is known about their population biology in the wild. So we are conducting a large-scale demographic analysis of giraffes in 2 wild, unfenced systems, one of them with widespread human impacts. And giraffes share their savanna habitats with the richest diversity and abundance of ungulate species on Earth. Most ungulate species live in the tropics. For example, the country of Tanzania alone has many, many more species of ungulates than the entire continent of North America. Yet most ungulate research has been done in the temperate zone. So we really need more studies of tropical ungulates to test our theories derived from temperate and boreal species. Giraffes are unique mammals with their great height and unusual coat patterns, but their social system is similar to many other taxa, including elephants, gorillas, dolphins and whales, and many other species of ungulates. They form groups that daily and even hourly merge and split and change membership in a dynamic known as fission-fusion. But within this dynamic system, females maintain long-term associations. Females form herds with other females and their young. They give birth in every month of the year, so that's different from the synchronous seasonal bursts that mammals tend to have here in temperate climates. After a gestation period of 15 months, they produce only 1 calf at a time, which they hide for the first couple of weeks before bringing it to meet the rest of the herd. Once mom and calf join the herd, the calves form groups called creches, and 1 or 2 older females will watch over the creche so other mothers can move freely each day to find food and water. This is an important form of cooperation. After about 4 or 5 years, young males leave their mothers and form bachelor herds where they fight to establish a dominance hierarchy, and the males push against each other to test their strength, and they'll hit each other with their massive heads. As they age, they add bone to their heads, which gives it more mass for fighting. When they became older bulls, about 8 years old, they're solitary like this male. They're roaming around searching for the ultimate prize, a female in estrus who's willing to mate with them. And this male is mate guarding. So here are the ranges of the 9 subspecies of giraffe. And this is the range of the Maasai giraffe, which is our study subspecies. There's been a 37% total decline in giraffe numbers over the past few decades, and extirpation in several range states. So Tanzania, where we work, still has the largest population of giraffes in the world, but the giraffe population in Tanzania has declined by about 50% since 1980. The biggest threats to giraffes are habitat loss, such as conversion of their savanna into farmland, deforestation for wood and charcoal to use as cooking fuel, and illegal killing for the bushmeat markets. Our research is investigating how giraffe demography is affected by the world around them, including natural predators, disease, poaching or presence of humans, vegetation, and climate. We're also investigating the influence of individual traits on their demography, such as the type of spots they have or their social behavior. We work in the Tarangire and Serengeti ecosystems in northern Tanzania. So this is Tarangire, and this is Serengeti. Tarangire is just east of the Serengeti, and both systems are defined by the seasonal migration of wildebeest and zebras that are shown here by these dotted lines. So Tarangire is completely separate and distinct from Serengeti because of the Great Rift Valley Escarpment, shown here in this dotted black line, a steep cliff that's a barrier to east-west movement. The difference between these 2 ecosystems is that in Serengeti, the majority of the migration range is protected lands that are shown in green. In Tarangire, most land is not formally protected, but it is inhabited largely by livestock keeping Maasai people. However, farming and the human population have expanded greatly in recent years in the Tarangire region. Each giraffe has a unique spot pattern that we use to track individuals throughout their lives. We use digital photos, computer vision, and then pattern recognition software and recapture statistics to monitor births, deaths, movements, and behaviors for more than 4,000 individual giraffes. And today, I'll present some of our research results from the Tarangire ecosystem, where we have more than 11 years of systematically collected photographic mark resite data, surveyed 3 times per year, from more than 3,100 individually identified giraffes, over a 4,500 square kilometer area with variable vegetation and different land uses. This ecosystem has one of the most diverse assemblages of large mammals in the world. We still have the full suite of predators like lions, leopards, and hyenas. We also have important migrations of thousands of wildebeests and zebras. So this is a map of the core of the Tarangire ecosystem, and the red lines on the map are the roads that we survey for giraffes. These shaded areas are where farming has become the dominant land use. We do active photographic surveys 3 times per year, driving all of the roads and taking pictures of every giraffe we encounter. There are 5 areas with different management regimes. There's Tarangire National Park and Lake Manyara National Park. And these are 2 national parks with high levels of wildlife protection, no livestock, and no permanent human settlements. We have Manyara Ranch, a cattle and wildlife tourism ranch with moderate levels of anti-poaching, lots of livestock, and no permanent human settlements. And finally, we have Lokasala game controlled area and Mtuwambu game controlled area. And these areas have lots of people, lots of livestock. They've got permanent settlements and farming and also big game hunting. But hunting of giraffes is illegal. We survey 3 times per year because Tanzania has 3 precipitation seasons, the short rains, the long rains, and the dry season. So then we can capture seasonal effects on demography. In our earliest research, we explored spatial variation in survival and reproduction among these 5 human-determined boundaries. Our data showed that there are still movements of giraffes among these 5 distinct sites in our study area. And that includes crossing over the farming areas and across busy tarmac roads. So this is still a functional metapopulation of giraffes. And by metapopulation here, we define that as a set of subpopulations that are connected by individual movements. But these subpopulations have different demographics, with survival and reproduction varying significantly among the 5 sites. Source sync statistics, specifically the combination of subpopulation size and internal growth rates, combined to give us the contribution of each subpopulation to metapopulation viability. And our analyses pointed to Tarangire National Park and Manyara Ranch together as the current engines of growth in this metapopulation. So we show them here in green. And not surprisingly, the least protected game-controlled areas were sinks, shown here in the red. So this visual representation shows us the relative importance of subpopulations and how movements maintain linkage among all the subpopulations. And the arrow width indicates movement rates. So you have lots of movements here like this and very few movements here, but there are still some. And these connections are what keep giraffes in the larger landscape. The movements maintain all subpopulations against local extinction by allowing natural mixing and recolonization. So if we lose those arrows of connectivity, we lose giraffes and other large mammals from a lot of this landscape. But why do we care about those areas outside the sink areas? Because even sink subpopulations have important genetics and reproductive value, and the source sink designations can change over time. So we shouldn't write off or neglect the sink subpopulations. And here's a little teaser for something I'll talk about later. A lot of these areas outside the parks are volcanic soils, which turns out to be a really high quality habitat for reproduction. When we examined the demographic rates by age class, we found that adult female survival, shown here, was highest in the national parks, where they're most protected, and the lowest in the village lands, where there's lots of poaching and potentially diseases transmitted by livestock. Conversely, over here we have calf survival. Calf survival was lowest inside the national parks, reflecting natural predation because lions, hyenas, and leopards are most dense inside the parks, and also potentially reflecting the good quality habitat, higher survival here in these other quality habitats. So this variation in demographic rates is very interesting, but the population biologists here listening will understand that for long-lived, slow reproducing mammals like giraffes, adult female survival is generally the most important segment of the population for influencing population growth rate. Therefore, bringing up that adult female survival rate in the village lands would be a huge conservation win. So how can we do that? Wildlife management areas are community conservation areas where villages outside national parks dedicate a portion of their lands to wildlife habitat, and they can make money from tourism there. But no one had ever quantified how successful these areas are for conserving wildlife. So we did just that for giraffes. We examined demography in the Burungi Wildlife Management Area adjacent to Tarangire National Park before and after the establishment of protections there. We found that the period after law enforcement rangers were trained and supported, so this is before and this is after, saw increased adult giraffe survival rates relative before and relative to a control area outside, inside Tarangire National Park where survival rates didn't change. So this indicates that better protection efforts reduced poaching and livestock disease exposure in these wildlife management areas. And our results provided compelling evidence that community-based conservation does achieve ecological success in Tanzania. Our next idea was, because giraffes live in dynamic groups, but females have long-term associations, what if we examined demographic variation among subpopulations defined not by the human-created administrative boundaries, but by giraffe social relationships? We used repeated sightings of adult females together in groups to create a social network, and then applied an algorithm to split the network into different social communities. These communities are therefore based on the giraffe's own social relationships, links between individuals, rather than by the administrative lines that we humans place on a map. The procedure identified these 10 social communities of female giraffes, each with about 60 to 90 individuals in them. And they're shown by these different colored dots here. So many of the communities overlap spatially. You can see this here from the map of, these are community home ranges. So this is the minimum convex polygon home range for all the individuals in each community. And they overlap quite a bit. But the individuals in one community did not associate much with the other communities, even though they used the same space. So adult female giraffes form socially structured communities, overlapping in space, yet still socially discrete. Now, how did demographic rates vary among these social communities? Here we have the 10 different communities listed on the x-axis. We have calves per adult female shown in the open bars, and calf survival shown with these solid bars. And you can see here, we clearly have variation in calf-related demographic rates among these social communities, many of which overlapped in space. We found no statistically significant differences among the communities in adult female survival, just calf demography. And this is common among long-lived animals, that adult female survival is more steady, while reproduction and juvenile survival vary a lot in space and over time. So here are the results visually on our map. These communities have the lowest calf survival and the lowest number of calves per female. And note here that these are the communities that are deepest within the protected national parks and farthest from people. These communities have the highest reproduction, and these communities have the highest calf survival. So we wondered what environmental factors were driving this variation in demography of calves among the communities. Again, higher fitness was not related to high levels of land protection, because the lowest fitness communities were actually inside the 2 national parks. Calf survival was lower in areas with more bushlands, possibly because lions prefer to hunt in these areas. There were more calves per female closer to human settlements, and this may relate to predation because people kill and harass predators, and the densities of lions and hyenas are much higher inside the parks than outside. As I noted before, it could also be that the habitat is better outside of the parks, closer to where people have settlements. And indeed, the highest fitness communities were in areas with the volcanic soils, which are in the north part of our study area, from about here and northward, and then also outside here. That's where those volcanic soils are. In general, these results support the idea that female giraffes may be risking the presence of people in order to reduce predation on their calves and access better quality food. The studies I've just described examined spatial variation in survival. We were also interested in temporal variation in survival, factors like season of birth or seasonal climate anomalies. An important factor affecting juvenile survival can be the timing of their birth. And all previous work on birth timing in ungulates has looked at highly synchronous birthing systems where babies born outside of the birth peak have lower survival because they miss the predator swamping peak or they're too small when the winter comes. And this is the case for synchronous temperate species like red deer that we have here or moose. However, most tropical ungulates, including giraffes, give birth year-round, but survival effects of birth season for tropical asynchronous ungulate species are unknown. Theoretically, seasonal survival should be equal or birth synchrony would evolve. We found that giraffe calves born during the dry season experienced the highest survival probability. So we believe that vegetation phenological match may confer a survival advantage to the offspring born during the dry season from a few possible mechanisms, and we don't know the exact mechanism. But this investigation showed how seasonal variation can affect juvenile survival in the tropics and may play a role in the evolution of synchronous births. However, with giraffes, this survival effect of the dry season was not strong enough, at least under the current conditions, to result in birth synchrony in this species. Because we calculated that mothers who delay estrus to ensure that their calves are born during the dry season would overall have lower lifetime reproductive success. We also tested hypotheses about how local climatic anomalies in rainfall, temperature, and vegetation greenness affected giraffe survival rates. And one novel aspect of the study we did was we also tested for interactive effects of rain, temperature, and greenness with how close the giraffes lived to the edges of the protected areas to see if climatic effects were exacerbated by anthropogenic effects. We found that adult survival decreased with higher vegetation greenness. You can see the survival rates are going down, and also decreased with higher rainfall. But survival increased with warmer temperatures. And this column here are animals living closer to the edges of the protected areas, like closer to and outside. And these are those that are living farther from the edges, deeper inside protected areas. And these are the three seasons: dry season here, long rains, and the short rains. We also found that the negative effects of rainfall and greenness were most pronounced during the short rainy season for animals living closer to the edges of the protected areas. So we suspect that the giraffe's unique shape and physiology makes them adapted to hotter conditions, and that's good. However, we think that more rainfall might be associated with increased disease, which could again be exacerbated by livestock presence outside protected areas, or that there's simply more poaching during the short rainy seasons just outside the protected areas. And more green vegetation might be less nutritious because the nutrients of the leaves become diluted. And there may be vegetation differences on the edges of the protected areas. Unfortunately, an increase in extreme rainfall during the short rainy seasons is projected under future climate scenarios for East Africa, which is likely to threaten the sustainability of giraffe populations in this region. In this next study, we explored both temporal and spatial survival of giraffe calves according to the seasonal presence of migratory prey and predation risk. So here we studied how the lions and migratory herds of wildebeest and zebras affected giraffe calf survival. Wildebeest and zebras migrate around the Tarangire ecosystem so that their local densities vary a lot over the course of the year. But giraffes and lions do not migrate. we found that the seasonal giraffe calf survival goes down as the local lion predation pressure increases. So lion predation pressure is an index of the seasonal local lion density divided by the total prey density. So it matters when those wildebeest and zebras are around. When there are lots of wildebeest and zebras around, there's lower lion predation pressure. The lions will eat them, and the giraffe calves have higher survival. But when there are no wildebeest and zebras around, the predation pressure is greater on giraffes, and the lions will eat more giraffe calves. So we see that there's a link between the migratory ungulates and the giraffes. And as the migratory herds decrease in numbers because of human land uses and poaching, then giraffes are also affected. Our study design also allowed us to investigate individual variation in survival. For example, how do individual characteristics of disease state, coat spot pattern type, or even level of sociability affect their survival? So here, this is giraffe skin disease. It's a disease of unknown cause that makes these lesions you can see here on the backs of the forelegs of Maasai giraffes. We documented giraffe skin disease prevalence for about 1,000 giraffes at 14 sites across northern Tanzania. And we found that the prevalence of this disease went down as soil fertility increased. This might be due to parasites in the soil, as parasitic nematodes are currently one theory of the cause of this disease, or could be something about the vegetation quality. However, luckily, we found that survival of giraffes with this disease was not different from unaffected animals. So emergency veterinary actions are not necessary. There still could be reproductive or maybe movement effects that we need to investigate. Another project we're working on is measuring, quantifying heritability, and assessing fitness consequences of coat spot pattern traits. Here are 5 mother-calf pairs from the Tarangire ecosystem, and this illustrates the similarity between generations. So this is mother and calf, you can see. And then also note the diversity of spots within our study areas, from these sort of blocky spots to these really sort of smaller pointy spots. There's a lot of diversity within our study area, and giraffe coat markings are highly variable. And it's been hypothesized that the variation in the coat patterns might affect fitness by camouflaging newborns against predators. We quantified 11 spot pattern traits of our giraffes using image analysis software, then determined whether spot pattern traits of our giraffes were heritable, and assessed whether variation in spot pattern traits was related to fitness as measured by juvenile survival. First, we found that spot pattern traits of solidity and circularity were indeed heritable based on mother-offspring regression. Then we showed that number of spots and also how elliptical the spots were affected first-year survival. So we demonstrated that characteristics of giraffe coat spot shape can be reliably measured. Some spots are heritable from mother to offspring, and that the shape of spots were correlated with newborn survival, indicating that there's fitness consequences of variation in the spot traits. And this might be because the spot traits are associated with camouflage, or it may reflect individual heterogeneity. When we're doing a lot more work, the spot pattern analyses are really fascinating to us. And so we have a lot of work we're doing now and planning to do in the future on this topic. We're currently looking into paternal heritability of spot pattern traits based on pedigrees of zoo giraffes, because we know the fathers. And then we're also collecting DNA from tissue samples of our wild giraffes so we can determine who the fathers are. And our team at Penn State is seeking the genetic code underlying variation in spot patterns. In the near future, we're interested in determining whether spot patterns play a role in mate choice by females, as well as genetic structuring of the social communities, and even survival in adults. Another individual trait is animals' level of sociability and how this might affect their survival. There have been quite a few studies in mammals finding that higher social connectedness improves fitness. These sociability studies didn't incorporate the influence of both an individual's physical environment, the type of vegetation they're in, how close they are to humans, this kind of thing, and the social environment together. So the physical and social environment together to see which is more important. Generally, social relationships among adult females are stronger and more stable than males for most mammals, including giraffes. So we tested whether the survival of adult females was most influenced by their sociability or by their physical environment, as well as any interactions. This graph shows survival probability as a function of gregariousness, which is the average group size. You can see that females who tended to be seen with few other females have lower survival. So put another way, more socially isolated females have lower survival. And overall, their sociability was significantly more important than their physical environment in explaining variation in survival. And this included the type of vegetation in their ranges and how close they lived to human settlements. Being around more other females may help them better protect their calves because there's more eyes looking out for predators, which would relieve stress on individual females. They may be able to share and obtain information about and dominate the best food sources, and thus improve their foraging efficiency. And they may simply experience physiological benefits by being around more familiar females within their social community. These days, after the social isolation of COVID in humans, I think we can understand that very well. Another important component of demography is movements. We studied patterns of natal dispersal, which is a critical part of population biology, and it involves leaving the birth site or social group, like this little gray giraffe here, traveling across unfamiliar territory, and then settling in the new home range or social group to breed. Now, this is risky because moving through unfamiliar areas may increase your risk of being preyed upon or coming into conflict with people, and it can be stressful without your relatives or not knowing where to find food. But the payoff is new mating opportunities and perhaps lower resource competition in the new location. For giraffes, absolutely nothing was known about dispersal dynamics. We did not know which sex disperses, how far they disperse, and at what age. So we quantified basic life history information about dispersal dynamics of the species. But given that adult female giraffes form these multiple, discrete, but overlapping social communities, we wondered whether it was possible for young calves born into one social community to disperse simply by switching into an overlapping community. They would still be able to stay in the same general area they were born, and they don't need to undergo a long, dangerous journey outside of familiar habitat into new areas. But they would have a new set of individuals with whom they can form new social bonds and breed. So in this next study, we examined social versus spatial dispersal. Here we have results showing how many males and females dispersed and what type of dispersal they showed. No dispersal is blue, and the other colors are different types of dispersal, either spatial only, social only, or both social and spatial dispersal. So you can see that males overall were significantly more likely to disperse. So here with this blue slice, we see most females stayed close to their birth sites and in the same social community they were born into, whereas most males dispersed in some fashion. Now here I'm showing just the animals that dispersed. And I want to highlight who socially dispersed. The two shades of yellow represent dispersers who switched communities, whether they stayed close to the birth site or moved far. And you can see that most male dispersers switched communities, whereas most female dispersers stayed in their birth community. They simply moved beyond a threshold distance for spatial dispersal. Traditional spatial-only dispersal studies, where you just look at how far they moved from birth to the time after dispersal, would miss this important social aspect of dispersal behavior. Thanks to our large study area of thousands of square kilometers and the large sample size of thousands of giraffes, we were able to test predictions about how natural and anthropogenic factors influence population biology across administrative boundaries and across multiple replicate social communities. So we had 5 administrative units and 10 social communities with dozens of individuals in each community to help explain the variation in demographic and movement rates at different scales. This enables us to understand some of the drivers and fitness consequences of the physical environment, social relationships, anthropogenic effects, and the interactions between them. So I'll leave you with some of the take-home headlines about what we've learned over the past decade that contributes to our understanding of population biology and evolutionary ecology. In terms of metapopulation dynamics, we found that subpopulations of giraffes are still connected by movements, including crossing over tarmac roads and farm fields. The subpopulations in Tarangire National Park and Manyara Ranch are sources, whereas subpopulations in the game-controlled areas are sinks. This is because, despite lower calf survival inside national parks, more natural predation, adult female survival is lower outside the parks in the game-controlled areas, and we think it's likely due to poaching or livestock diseases or a combination of the two. And we suggest that volcanic soils are especially important for reproduction. So this means it's important to enable giraffes to continue to access these areas outside the parks where these volcanic soils occur, even though their population sinks. But there's hope. We can improve adult survival and reverse the sink designation. We showed that establishment of community wildlife management areas with anti-poaching and livestock control measures helped improve giraffe survival. So we recommend that these wildlife management areas be financially supported and expanded as necessary. In terms of natural temporal dynamics, giraffe calves born in the dry season have higher survival than those born in other seasons, but not enough to result in birth synchrony in this species. Migratory herds of wildebeests and zebras deflect natural predation away from giraffe calves, thus helping giraffe populations. So if we want to save giraffes, we should also save these migratory ungulates, who of course also provide other critical ecosystem services in their own right. More rainfall and higher vegetation greenness were associated with lower giraffe survival. And climate change predictions are for more rain in East Africa. So there might be a reason for concern here, and this underscores the importance of doing things we know we can do to sustain giraffes, such as community conservation in more of the landscape to relieve that edge effect. We revealed that female giraffes live in distinct, spatially overlapping social communities with different rates of reproduction and calf survival. Young males often disperse socially without having to make large physical displacements into unknown areas. And this social aspect of dispersal is missed if we measure just spatial movements. On the other hand, young females rarely change social communities. So maintaining long-term bonds with others in their discrete community is an important feature of female giraffe societies. Taking it further, we showed that socially isolated adult females had lower survival. Sociability or gregariousness was a more important influence on survival than their physical environment. So clearly, social connectedness is important for female giraffes. And we should consider sociality in population management and conservation of giraffes, such as translocation. And finally, we showed that giraffe skin disease is associated with infertile soils, but it's not causing mortality. So immediate veterinary intervention is not necessary. And giraffe calves inherit some spot traits from their mothers. And individual variation in spot traits influences calf survival in the first few months of life, either from camouflage or individual heterogeneity, we're not sure yet. Giraffes are continuing to decline, and so our hope is that this population biology research can continue to provide science-based conservation solutions to ensure a future for giraffes and the magnificent African savannas where they live. And in this spirit, we're currently doing individual-based population modeling here at EBD with Maria Paniw and Eloy Revilla. And our goal with this project is to use all of this demographic information we've gathered over the past 10 years to project future extinction risk and determine which conservation actions can best maintain the giraffe population in the Tarangire ecosystem. Maybe we'll present those results next year once we have them. These are our main co-authors and collaborators that we've had the great pleasure of working with over the years, including folks from a variety of countries and institutions. And they're part of Team Twiga. Twiga is the Swahili word for giraffe. And thanks also to our main funders of our fieldwork and our research salaries. We couldn't do any of this work without them. And that's it for the talk. So we're very happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much,
okay, and I'm going to quickly switch as Derek comes over here. I'm going to switch to
while you do this, I'll just remind our audience online that they can use the live chat to ask their questions. And let's see. So I can see you. And Derek is
hold on.
join us for the discussion. Can you hear me?
Yeah, how does that, is that working?
I can hear you.
Okay. Hello?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Oh, there's no mic on that? Okay, all right, I'm gonna turn off. All right, can you speak again, Letitia?
Yes.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Okay.
Perfect.
Sorry.
No, don't worry. So welcome, Derek. I guess I'll take advantage that I'm moderating to ask my first questions while people type their questions in the chat. I was wondering, because you showed those in your different study areas, that Lake Manyara, if I'm saying it right, is also a protected area, but it doesn't appear to be a source in your meta-population. And it does seem not so well connected, but I was wondering why is it not a source? Is it a connectivity issue? Is it a local management issue? So yeah, what's
a great question
about this?
Great question. Yeah, you want to take that?
Sure. So Lake Manyara National Park is a very small population, only about 100 giraffes, versus the other populations, which are several hundred giraffes each. And so it's very small. Because of the small population size, it has a smaller impact on the metapopulation. And also almost all of the calves that are born there are killed by lions or die for some reason. And so there's extremely low recruitment. So, and there's also very low connectivity to the rest of the study area. So the combination of those three things make it not important to the metapopulation as a whole.
Yeah, in fact, I'll just add to that. Over the entire time of our study, we've only had one individual move in and out. So we know they can still do it, but it is really quite isolated.
Yeah.
And right now we're doing some collecting of genetic and some DNA from tissue samples to determine the level of inbreeding in that population. But interesting, we've also learned that this population has been quite stable over time. It's been 100 individuals for about 30 years. So it's small and it has these issues, but somehow it's like, you know, somehow maybe almost just that carrying capacity.
Thank you. Another question was around those. So you explained very well how the female communities were organizing themselves, but you also mentioned that the males were forming bachelor herds. Are there some spatial pattern in how those female communities and bachelor herds are organizing themselves?
Yeah, that's a good question. I can ask that, sure. Yeah, so we do that. Well, I'll just mention that we did plot where we would see bachelor herds on the landscape, right? We plotted sort of where the young males were, where older males were, and where the female groups with calves were. And there definitely appears to be some segregation, some sexual segregation, and where they occur on the landscape. And what was it? What was it?
Super curious.
Oh, the super community. So right. So we didn't mention it in this talk, but in another analysis we did, we included the males into the social network analysis and looked to see how that then fell out. And what happened was we discovered 4 what we called super communities. So this is actually quite fascinating. In Lake Minyara is its own super community and its own female community, that small population. But with the other more connected area, we had 3 super communities. One was in the north, one was in the central part, but it's the northern Tarangire, and then in the southern part of our study area, quite geographically distinct. Within each of those super communities, we had 3 female communities. So it's almost like there's some number. It's like these populations are very structured.
And the males are linking.
Yeah, the males are right. So you have these 3 social communities of females, and males are linking as they roam around searching for females in estrus. The males are linking up those female communities. And we also calculated the movement rates among these super communities, and we found, there's some movement, especially by males, adult males, but they tend to go back to the super community they started in.
Very low rates.
Very low rates, and they tend to end up back again. So it's very fascinating. And we luckily had this big area with lots of giraffes that we can actually look at structure of this population. And then the next thing we want to do is look at the genetics to see how genetics contributes to the structure.
So there's the super communities are tribes that don't really interact much with each other. They're pretty self-contained.
Yeah, and I'm just going to throw in here too the thing about the elephants. So there's we have some colleagues who are doing elephant research in Tarangire. There's a very, very dense elephant population, and they also discovered that there's 2 communities of elephants in Tarangire National Park that divide in the same spot that giraffes do. And it's fascinating because it's basically it's a sand river that I could walk across, yet somehow it's dividing both the giraffes and the elephants. So it's pretty fascinating. Something's going on there, but yeah.
It is. Thank you. I see we have some questions on the chat. So I'll start by not a question, just a comment by Jennifer that thank you for a lovely talk. And then we have a question by Maria. So I'll just read it. Really great talk, Monica. Are other ungulates being studied in the same area? If so, are they responding similarly to the rainfall change?
Answer that? Okay, yeah. So we actually did. We're there's people who are basically just doing counts of ungulates, and that includes us. We counted ungulates for that study of alternative prey, and we ended up looking at the wildebeest and zebras as they migrate, but we also have been counting other ungulates. And it's wonderful you asked that, Maria, because I know we're doing in partnership. Maria is also looking at the covariation of giraffes densities with those ungulate densities seasonally to see if there's covariation. So yeah, we counted, and there's climatic variation. What did we find when we looked at?
It varied by species, I can't remember.
It varied by species, yeah, it varies by species, and there's definitely seasonal variation in their abundances that we calculated. And I'm really sorry, I have to get back to you with all the specific details. We had some students from the University of Zurich who were studying that, and now some folks from that Maria's working with EBD also looking at that.
Thank you. I'm moving on to a question by Pablo. Sorry if you already mentioned, but are females and males differently affected by environmental harshness?
Yeah, so males tend to have adult males tend to have lower survival overall, but they were similarly affected by the climatic anomalies that we looked at. So I can go back to that slide if you want, but let me pop back to that slide. There. So you can see we have the blue are males and the pink is females. So there wasn't really not a difference in how the sexes responded. They responded.
Temperature.
Oh yeah, temperature a little bit. Yeah, that's right. So warmer temperatures had a stronger positive effect on males actually than females. But yeah, I was surprised. I thought we might. We tested all had its sex in there as an effect, and they were similarly affected by the extremes of climate.
Thank you. Next question is by Duarte, who's he's thanking you for the interesting talk. And then he says, you told that both habitat, volcanic soil, and predation underlie the survival rate. Do you know which is more important? Could you disentangle these effects?
Varies by age class.
It varies by age class. Yeah, yeah. I wouldn't think that we've disentangled, which was more important that I recall, because we don't really have very much data on exactly what's causing their mortality.
And the predation is sort of a guess that it's predation, because we just know that predation varies in different places, but we don't know exactly what's killing the animals. So the predation and the exposure to livestock and humans all co-vary. So we can't disentangle the humans from the cows and goats and the lion densities, because they all co-vary along the same gradients.
But it's a great question. Yeah.
Our next question is by Elena. So she's also thanking you for this amazing talk. Which specific measures, in your opinion, could be successful? For instance, that means, feasible, implemented to increase adult female survival in the non-protected areas. Do you want me to read it again? Sorry.
No, I understand. I think what kinds of things can we do? And I think the establishing more wildlife management areas into areas where they are. So we talked about Burungi wildlife management area. The areas to the north are where we have those, what we think are important volcanic soils, and those are don't have any formal protection right now, and even to the east as well. So we would really like to see, and we've been advocating for more establishment of these WMAs. And what that does is they get together and they make a land use plan. So they determine what areas they'll be farming in and have livestock, and then other areas that are important for the wildlife, and then they can make money from the tourism there. So it differs. Instead of so the funding goes to the WMA, which then goes out to the communities. So there was a little bit of trepidation about those wildlife management areas. People were wondering, is it really going to benefit us? But after the years of the Burungi WMA, and then there was another one that was placed on the other side, which we also found had positive effects on the wildlife, the people over time realized that it was actually helping them economically. There was funding coming, and they started to show much more support. So I think now they've been established and they've been working, and there's rangers, local rangers that are trained in anti-poaching. And then there's, controls over the livestock and where people can do their farming. That has really benefited. And so we would like to see that expanded. I think that's one really helpful mechanism. Something else that's been used in another area to the east of Tarangire is conservation easements. So basically establishing conservation easements with various, I don't know if they're individual villages, but that has also appeared to work to protect habitat for it's where wildebeest and zebras go to give birth, and those areas were being converted. And so another avenue, aside from wildlife management areas, is doing these conservation easements, and that has also proven effective at protecting habitat.
Are there any conflicts between the giraffe populations and farmers and ranchers?
Not so much with giraffes, because giraffes do not, they don't raid crops. So there's more, the main conflicts are with elephants that raid crops, and baboons and some of those animals. But luckily, giraffes, they don't really kill people. I mean, you sometimes hear about giraffes killing people in the game ranch in South Africa or something, but doesn't happen in Tanzania with the wild giraffes. They're not dangerous. They don't raid crops. They're the national animal of Tanzania, and generally we feel very lucky to be studying them because people really love them. So it's sort of easy to get people excited and jazzed about protecting giraffes. But the problem is they're also apparently delicious, and people like to eat them. And but I want to point out that in terms of poaching, it's really for the markets. So you don't have like individual people going out, killing a giraffe and then just bringing it home, the meat. It's really for bushmeat markets that are controlled by kind of big criminal syndicates, really. So, it goes into the cities, right? It goes to Arusha, even across borders to places like Nairobi. So when we try to reduce the levels of poaching, it's market hunting. So, it's kind of these criminal syndicates. So it's shown that if you provide people with alternative livelihoods to being, poaching for these markets, then that people are willing to, they don't want to be poaching really. They're doing it to make some money. If you give them alternative livelihoods, that's another great way to help reduce poaching pressure on wildlife.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So I think we still have time for a couple of questions. There are no more on the chat for now, but this is an invitation to type some more. So I'll just move on to another question of mine. I'm not exactly, I'm thinking a bit out loud, so apologies in advance for that. But I understand you have an amazing data set and you've been doing this field monitoring for a very long time, but are there any equivalent data on other giraffe populations that could be used to see how much variability there are between those between regions, for instance? Or
just
Serengeti?
We have data from Serengeti. That's the only other comparable study, but we haven't analyzed those data yet. We've just accumulated enough data to start analysis, so that's an upcoming soon project.
Yeah, the exciting thing about Serengeti is that there was demography, so very little has been done with demography of giraffes, recognizing individuals and tracking them. Very, very little, all across Africa, essentially, not much really. A little bit in Uganda, but only very new in a couple of years. So yeah, Serengeti though, there was a demography study done using individual recognition back in the late 70s, a really great thorough study by Robin Paniw. And then in from 2007 to 2010, a colleague of ours, Megan Strauss, had done replicated that study and did also demographic analyses of individual recognized giraffes for those 3 years. And she compared with the past. So in 2018, we replicated that again. So we started up again, and we're using the same exact study areas both of them did. We have the same map and the same areas we're driving. And so now we've got the data over a few years, and we're going to then be analyzing and comparing to the previous two. And we actually have Megan Strauss's data, so we can even analyze them combined together. We've been collecting cameras, and there's some camera traps that were out there for the intervening time between Megan's study and when we started. So we're going to try to include some camera trap data information, so we can hopefully look at a long-term demography of giraffes in the central part of Serengeti. And that'll be our project for next year. And that's a great question. Yeah, then we can compare with Serengeti, exactly. And those are really named two of the big key populations of giraffes in Tanzania.
well, that's exciting. That could be a topic for a next seminar then.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, 2 years from now.
Follow up. So I still don't see any question. Let's give the audience a couple of seconds if they have any more pressing question. In the meantime, you told me that they could also reach out to you via email.
Absolutely, yeah.
Things come afterwards. So going one, what? No question. This is fine. I think I can speak for everybody by thanking you again for this amazing talk and discussion. This was really fascinating. It was a great pleasure to have you here. Unfortunately, virtually, but hopefully you'll be back.
Sorry about that. Thank you everybody for bearing with us. And we have really been enjoying being here in wonderful Spain. So he wants to live here. He wants to live here now. I mean, I kind of do too, but it's a wonderful country. So we are very much enjoying it here.
Thank you very much. So with that, I will close this seminar, and we'll see you next week in person at EBD. Bye.
Thank you very much.